So, good evening, friends, and a very warm welcome to the Alka Jalan Foundation's presentation for this evening. Death and grief are the two words we have had to deal with in these trying times of COVID. Just as our understanding of the virus is in doubt, so are the unsure of how to deal with death and grief that comes with loss. Today, we present Rajiv Mehrotra, Honorary Trustee and Secretary Foundation for Universal Responsibility of His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, who will offer some reflections on suffering, death, and grief as a sadhaka on the journey of life. There are no simple answers or a magic wand, even in the consolations of philosophy. Yet, we must engage with it and be kind to ourselves. So come, join us as we reflect on this. Thank you, Rajiv Bhai, for sparing the time to share your vast experience and knowledge. Namaste.
Thank you, Alka ji. Namaskar, pranams to all our fellow travelers who have joined us this evening on what I can only with deep humility describe some reflections on suffering, death, grief, and COVID in these extremely challenging times. Well more than 20 years ago, when my mother was dying, it was the first sort of significant death that was unfolding in around me in the family, and I was devastated. And so I had been to see His Holiness, and I've been a student of his for a long time, and I started weeping. I said, my mother is dying. And, I was looking for some consolation and comfort. Everything will be okay. Don't worry. I will pray. Why don't you pray? And instead, he sort of held my hand and gently looked at me and said, meditate on death. And I thought that at that time, that was an extremely harsh thing to say to someone who was devastated at the prospect of his mother dying, or, that it was imminent. And then, cut to, and sometimes I use these cinematic phrases because I am by profession filmmaker. And I was doing a film on a very famous spiritual teacher in the South. And so, work had to go on for a while at least. And so I was filming. And I didn't know him very well at that time. It was still early days. And so he came, before the crowd, and he looked at me and said, I've been expecting you. And he used my name and said, I know why you're here and what troubles you. You're deeply distraught over your mother's health. And he materialized and produced some vibhuti. And I came back to Delhi with that vibhuti, sort of feeling far more hopeful in some senses than the directions of my guru. And so I was, I used to mix the vibhuti in water and give it in tablespoons to my mother. Well, as the months passed by, I realized that it was the Dalai Lama's advice to confront and engage with the true nature of reality instead of the the consolations that we are often presented, and 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 uh, and so I began this journey of trying to meditate on death. And how far I've been successful is really another story that I often tell about my teacher. And so I'd done a book called The Mind of the Guru. And there was this sort of book release function at the India Habitat Center in Delhi in full glory, with His Holiness releasing the book, and media and television and my friends and family. And he was holding up this book, and it was all sort of a great high. And so the book got released, and His Holiness began to speak. And then he said, Rajiv is a very hardworking, good student, and he works very hard. But how much he knows, I don't know. And so, with that mandate from my teacher, I, with great hesitation and almost trepidation, sort of move into these reflections, keeping in mind that large treaties and books and philosophers have held forth on these, and here am I, trying to offer insights that might be meaningful. And I think that from the tradition that we come from, certainly here in India, Hinduism, Buddhism, and its many sort of relations, we have come to recognize that suffering, death, and grief are an inherent part and are par for the course of the human condition, and that we embrace it far more intimately than many other or most other cultures do. But for our generation, never have we seen so many of us in so many parts of the world who have experienced that suffering and grief so ferociously, and in so much of it. And so it's important it's useful to reflect and pause and just think about what is happening to us and around us. And so many people are dying, separated from their loved ones. Again, this is it's contrarian to our sort of Indic civilization response to people who are dying. We tend to embrace them, we tend to be with them, we tend to hug them, love them, hold them. And how many of them are mourning away from their loved ones, or their families and their relatives. And those of us who haven't lost somebody in our immediate families are surrounded by daily reminders of death, even as we fear for our own health and that of our family and friends. And today, death has become a really isolating experience, magnified by the, we call it social distancing. And our addiction to devices have compounded our sense of disconnect and feelings of loneliness. And they are a poor, if still needed, substitute for the deep need, the reality of human-to-human contact, even if it's to share a silence. And in India in recent months, it has been even more wrenching that when we lose a loved one, it's so much worse if we know of their pain at the end of their lives. Sort of in stretchers outside hospitals, gasping for oxygen, or in a hospital where oxygen runs out and you just die. There's this sort of terrible sense of fear and loneliness that we cannot even imagine them having experienced. And many of us, I sometimes do, almost experience a survivor's guilt when I see so many people suffering and dying, and then recognizing that virus is transmitted by close contact, and that people who I love dearly are and I am vulnerable to proximity and the virus by being close to them. And so we're surrounded by masks everywhere, or at least we should be, and we're not. And then we tend to resent people's indifference to us. I mean, I've seen people feeling frustrated that when they have, they've lost someone, and people aren't there to connect with them. And we look for magic words and bullets that can erase our pain, and there are none. And I think it's very important and useful to have the humility and to recognize that there are no easy, quick fix, as I said, magic words or bullets that can ease this great chasm, this great sense of isolation, loneliness, and pain. So I mean, it again, historically, our traditions, our practices, teach us that we need to accept our feelings. We don't like to talk about politics, but rage at the collapse of governance to deliver, to look after us, sadness, despair for people who have fared worse than we have, and sometimes envy for those who are doing better. It is a constant process of expansion and contraction. But there is no alternative for us other than to accept these feelings wholly and without judgment. It is only then that the healing process can begin. It doesn't mean that the pain is going to go away. On the contrary, it becomes and needs to become a part of us, a kind of sacred niche we can carry inside us, because closure is an illusion. Even great masters grieve. His Holiness, was telling me again when I was weeping in front of him and feeling very embarrassed that I was, as to how tears had flowed, from his eyes when his tutor, and he was much closer to his tutors than his parents because he'd been taken away from the family when he was very young, and that how legitimate, reasonable, and natural it was to grieve. And C.S. Lewis, in his poem Grief Observed, writes, "No one ever told me that grief was so much like fear. I am not afraid, but the sensation is like being afraid. The same fluttering in the stomach, the same restlessness, the yawning I just keep on swallowing." So it's that reality. And yet, that harsh, difficult reality perhaps offers us the best or very important, I use the word best because it sounds almost impolite and utilitarian to refer to death in those terms. But the Buddha stressed the importance of understanding and engaging with death. And, we know that, when he distracted and fed up of the life of luxury of the palace, when he stepped out and confronted old age, sickness of death, and the mendicant, it was when he saw death for the first time in human suffering that he was drawn to walk away from his life of luxury and the promise of being a future king. So that was the break that wanting to address, resolve, understand death, that catalyzed such an amazing, valuable legacy that the Buddha left behind. And what did he do as he went out? I mean, he engaged in the traditional practices of his times, found them inadequate. They brought equanimity, they brought distractions, They dulled his sensibilities so that the pain of suffering wasn't as sharp, but they didn't resolve his crisis and his pain. And that didn't happen till he sat under the Bodhi tree and determined not to get up till he found the way out. And that way out was very simple. It was quite simply an experience and an insight into the true nature of reality, a realization. And a realization that became a reflexive response. We can try and describe it, and there are many attempts that people have made and talk about what is enlightenment and what is samadhi. But in reality, it doesn't help us unless it is the lived realization. Because we have to recognize, and it's a mundane example, but if I was to try and explain to you what coffee tastes like, unless you have tasted it, I will fail. And so it is impossible to be able to try and communicate to someone the insight and the wisdom, the realization that liberated the Buddha from his experience of the pain and suffering of the human condition. And he too hesitated, because when he finished his reflections and his journey under the Bodhi tree, he stepped out and he anguished, he agonized about whether and how he was going to share this insight that he developed, and so that people could experience the freedom that he had found from the trappings of the human condition. And he was moved when he saw his fellow travelers from before he had set out on his path, and who were following very rigorous austerities, and who frowned at the Buddha's middle path, where he was comfortably dressed and his skin was glowing because he looked well nourished. And so he felt that it was something he had to do. And so what did he set out to do? He didn't merely set out to talk about it. He proposed and taught the method that we continue to use today, and that we adapt and modify to suit our particular sensibilities, and hence you have diverse religions. And so in the tradition of Sri Ramakrishna, I mean, because I'm talking to a group primarily in Calcutta, and of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and it's important we recognize this and reaffirm this, particularly at this time of great division, politics or no politics, on the grounds of our beliefs and our faith. And so here was Sri Ramakrishna, and I prefer to use his example, as I will, of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who was a bhakta, an avatar, and a pujari in the temple of a lower caste queen, Rani Rashmani. And what does he do? He, within the temple precincts, he begins to engage in full public view of the sadhanas of the Hindu tradition to start with, Dvait, Advait, of the diversity of approaches to realization and wisdom within Hinduism itself. And he doesn't stop there. He steps out of the temple precinct, builds a kutir, I mean a cottage or a little place to stay, and engages in the practices of Islam. And he eats the diet of a Muslim and lives the life of a Muslim. And then he does that with Christianity and other faiths. And he is sending out a powerful message. He didn't need to do that. He was an avatar, after all. And he did it because he really wanted to let us know that each one of us needs a different mental diet, and that we should respect those diversity of diets, and that they each lead to a realization, to an experience of reality that will, I was going to say release, but I mean, that may be too far an aspiration for someone like me anyway, but diminish or soften the hard edge of reality. And so even as I share these perspectives with you, it is with deep respect and recognition for that diversity, and that this is not the only approach. And so it is the same principle that enables His Holiness the Dalai Lama to go to a church, sing a Christian hymn, and wear a cross around his neck, as it does to go to a mosque and do the namaz, or to a temple and do an arti. So what is it? Just to get back to the Buddha, and having reassured all of us that it is not an exclusivist approach. However, that the destination is not the same, only because the journey strives to understand the true nature of reality and to realize it so deeply and fundamentally that it is a reflexive response. It is not considered, because it is only when we realize it that it will begin to impact the deepest recesses of our consciousness and our sense of, terrible word to use in today's world, inspired by the American Constitution, happiness. So that is the aspiration. But it isn't like the old story of the blind men looking at different parts of the elephant and each one of them seeing only a part. I think we have begun to recognize that there is no single reality. And today, quantum physics is telling us, in the split experiment, if you go and see a wonderful short film on PBS, which demonstrates that the very nature of reality is determined by the presence of the observer. So we embrace this as we continue on our respective journeys, to the insight and wisdom and realization that will enable us to deal with some of the elements of what I was describing as a terrible, horrific condition that the human species finds itself in. So he began to talk about the Four Noble Truths, and the first was the fact of suffering. And I should clarify that this is again one of the problems that, like I mentioned about not being able to describe coffee unless you've drunk it. And so the British translators who put the Buddha's teachings out into the world, and we must be grateful to them for having done it at that time, actually dukkha translates more closely to unsatisfactoriness, so dissatisfaction, and that dissatisfaction is an inherent part of the human condition, particularly in the manner that we end up leading our lives. So it is craving rather than desire, because again, we tend to associate desire as a negative emotion, or craving as a negative emotion, but we forget that we can desire positive things, like we can desire other people's happiness. And so the word that Buddha used really was craving, that because we crave experience, we crave satisfaction even, rather than live a life of impersonal experience. We just keep grasping, craving, and because that craving chases the conceptual experience, it can never be satisfied. The other pillar on which he built his teaching was the idea of interdependence. And today, these are not sort of abstract, profound spiritual ideas. They're everyday, realities that we need to accept in order to, for our species to survive. Because if we keep craving and desiring endlessly for material goods, the economic systems, the planet, principles of equity. There's no way that they can be fulfilled. And so it was the idea of interdependence, that we live in an interdependent world. Our very survival, leave alone our happiness, depends on others. And as a trivial but very significant example is to go back to that cup of coffee or coffee. We forget as we savor that coffee in the morning, and if you're an American, you grab a cup as you rush to work, or if you're a South Indian, you make filter coffee and you savor it as you read the Hindu or whatever is your favorite newspaper in that part of the world. Is that there's somebody who's grown the coffee, it has been packaged, it has been transported to you, you've added milk, and someone has reared a cow, and so everything that we consume or use comes from so many diverse sources. Even in the times of COVID, I mean, when we rush to a hospital and there's no oxygen, there are these amazing health workers who are straining themselves, working 18 hours a day in such emotional distress to try and help some of us survive, and to make the extremely difficult choices of, who do you give a scarce oxygen to? A father of 3 children or a single 70-year-old man? The other pillar was impermanence. And that is where the death is such an important illustration that finally, in that particular form, everything is impermanent. From the height of Mount Everest to the crystal that we think is so solid, to our emotions, to our relationships, to the way we look. We know that every so many hours, days, and weeks, our cells are changing, and so it is on these pillars of understanding the true nature of the human condition, unsatisfactoriness, the cause of it, grasping, the factors of interdependence and impermanence, leads us to a somewhat relatively complex idea, somewhat uniquely Buddhist, and that's called shunya. And it is in our tradition, unless we truly understand and realize shunya, we are unable to give up grasping, because we begin to see external reality as something solid. So while it is independent, it is impermanent, and it is unsatisfactory, it is also existent on causes and conditions. And I will just come to brief sort of reference to karma, because after all, the doctrine of karma has to do with causes and conditions, and is also the basis of modern science, except that we tend to extend this and not just say every cause has an equal and opposite effect, but to talk about causes and conditions and the matrix they create. And in Buddhist scriptures, there is a famous dialogue. I'm going to take those extra 2 minutes in the brief time that I have to just recount that, because I think it captures a complex idea very vividly. And this was between King Milinda and Thera Nagasena. And the latter was trying to explain to the king this law of shunyata, or interdependence. And the king wasn't getting it. Not surprising, because I'm barely getting it, and I've been trying for decades. And so he asked the king as to how he had come to see him, whether on foot or on riding. And your majesty, is that if you came in a chariot, declare to me, tell me, what is the chariot? Is the pole the chariot? Truly not, said the king. Is the axle the chariot? Truly not, said the king. Is the chariot body the chariot? No. Is the yoke the chariot? Of course not. Are the reins the chariot? No. Is the goading stick the chariot? Of course not. Where then, O king, he asked, is this chariot in which you seem you came? You are a mighty king of all the continent of India, and yet you speak a lie when you say there is no chariot. Because the sheer analysis tells us that the chariot is actually a composite of several elements. The chariot itself is not an independent entity. It is made up of these elements. And so whether it is in our exaggerated celebration or rejection of people or ideas, we tend to look at the whole not as a sum of the parts that make it up, but that is something ineffably frozen and absolute. And it is only when we begin to see that it is made up of different elements that our sense of its solidity, it's like when we recognize that a human being that we know today, or an object, like a cell phone, or being madly in love with somebody, the objects of our desire are not frozen. So even as we change ourselves, all the objects and human beings and phenomena are changing. So even if we begin to try and just visualize we're changing, this object of our obsession is changing, and yet we're devastated when both of us are changing, our needs are changing, the object is changing, and then suddenly we're not able to reconcile the two. And that really, that recognition is what eludes us and frightened us when we arrive at death and the dissolution of the elements of that life. Because we have so solidified it in absolute terms in our expectations, in our needs, in our consciousness, in our emotions, that it suddenly, our world literally comes apart, as does the consciousness and the human body in which it resides. So it is not merely in the consolation of the idea and understanding it, to me, talking about it today, but to truly, experientially believe and feel that and live that moment to moment. And so Nagasena went on to say, I speak no lie. The word chariot is but a figure of speech, a term, an appellation, a convenient designation for pole, axis wheels, chariot body, and banner staff. And you can apply that to a human being. It is a composite of many elements. It could be, you could talk about consciousness, you could talk about emotions, you could talk about human body, and then you say about the body, what happens if there's somebody without an arm, which parts of the human body actually define it. So the minute we begin to recognize and experience that the human body is a composite, it makes death a little easier to process and understand. And this applies equally, not just to the exterior, the other human being who dies, but also our experience of ourselves. So Rajiv, a name, a title. I too am made up of these parts, of these many parts. And they are mere names and terms, not corresponding to anything that is really and actually existing independently. So in the ultimate sense, there exist only changing energies, and entities. And this refers not only to matter, but also to properties of matter and to the properties of the mind. And which is why our mind and our emotions keep changing. So today, someone, we are madly devoted to or obsessed by, something happens, and the next day we're not. And we think something or somebody is madly desirable, and we're willing to die for it. And something else happens, and we begin to see them as evil and ugly. And so it was really what we were perceiving and seeing and treating as our reality that we have held on to. And the great challenge that comes when we are engaging in this process of reality and in human form and the human condition, death is the ultimate reality. And then, I mean, whether you believe in Atman that lives on, or you believe, as we do, subtle mind, and I will come to that if time permits, is a great deal is fear. Because suddenly we are so comfortable with the tangible, what we believe is constant, that the very idea of it ceasing to exist, and actually, it's not ceasing to exist; it's just dismantling. But in our experience, it is just ceasing to exist. Person dies, bang, it's gone, or he or she is gone. And but at the same time that we are also being trained to reject fear, and that fear is something terrible, and I experience fear, and so I should do what I can to eliminate fear, and to substitute it by, I don't know what, bravery, or whatever the antidote or the antonym for fear is. And yet we know, and we know the flight and fright response. We know that fear is essential to our existence. And if we didn't fear the fact that smoking may cause cancer and we would die, we would probably keep smoking. So it is our relationship to fear that that is important. And another very sort of valuable, very important learning that I had. My first teacher was, and I received a Diksha from Swami Ranganathananda, who was later the president of the Ramakrishna Mission. And I remember that in my first meetings with him, I was led into his room. I must have been in my teens, and I was experiencing a great deal of fear about everything in my life. And he just sat on his chair while I sat on the floor and held my gaze. And I don't know how long it was. It felt like 15 minutes. But when it was over, he just said, "Fear, not fear." And it has been one of the most powerful teachings that have continued to resonate in my life. And a little aside, because when I was talking about the celebration of diversity, one of the great joys of my life, one of the greatest joys of my life, that my first teacher and subsequent teachers, a teacher, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, became very good friends. And His Holiness traveled went to Belur Math, Swamiji went to Dharamsala. And so I had this great joy of having two teachers, my first root teacher, and then, of course, the teacher whose ideas have sort of dominated and guide my life. So what does this terror of fear, the terrible fear of death, do to us, and particularly when death has happened and we experience loss? And while I will focus mostly on death and grieving the loss of another human being, This can equally apply to the loss of a relationship, to the loss of a job, to a loss of one's identity. So it's not limited exclusively, but I mean, this is the context that so completely overwhelms us. And so I think we need to, recognize that suffering and grieving is not transformed by telling us, or someone telling us what to do or how to do it, any teacher or any philosophy. Like the process of realization, we have to do it ourselves. And which is why that vibhuti didn't work. And the vibhuti that I received could work, but it would depend on me, aspects of my faith, my determination, or other elements, which this really isn't, the context to pursue. And so we have to do the work ourselves in the journey of life. And that grief, particularly the loss of a loved one, we have to recognize that it is often and will remain an undercurrent that runs through the rest of our lives. And I've seen this with His Holiness in the middle of a complex teaching, when he's discussing an idea, and you'll see a little tear in his eyes. And he will pause, brush it aside, and I will tell you that this was a teaching he received from such and such teacher. And it was both a sadness and gratitude that brought the tear to his eyes. So that lesson is twofold. Is A, that it remains as another undercurrent, and that we need not dismiss our emotions as something that diminishes us in some ways. And that because we experience the grief or fear or sadness, that we are somewhat, we're lesser human beings. And but when it breaks to the surface, we often feel as though only this I knows this pain. And yet, grief is a universal experience for all of us, even though it might be experienced differently and expressed in a different vocabulary. And again, we can never really know what another person feels or what the nature of their experiencing grief is. Our philosophies, tell us that we have to discover these realizations from within ourselves, and that only the veils of ignorance need to be lifted. To try and sort of move a little bit in the next 10 minutes that I have remaining into the method, techniques, and practices that may add value to this evening together. And it has hinged on the idea of compassion as the guiding principle, as the guiding aspiration. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama is considered the reincarnation or incarnation of the Buddha aspect of compassion. And so why is compassion so important, or altruism, or love? I mean, the different words, and as I mentioned to you, that every word, English word that we use for a complex, subtle experience like this that draws on our traditions is imperfect and incomplete. And the idea of nurturing compassion is that to diminish the sense of the I that suffers. So if I am thinking of you, or if I'm thinking of somebody else's suffering and pain, it diminishes my own obsession with what is going on in my mind, to soften that sense of the I, the nurturing and cultivation of compassion. We also now know, in terms of the modern equivalents of the teachings from modern psychology, which traditional religion, if I look at it as conventional psychology, then today you have people like Daniel Goleman and these other people who are writing about emotional intelligence. That is a kind of modern, inverted commas, religion. Rather a poor comparison, but suffice it for now, is that when they have interviewed people who are psychologically distressed, who are grieving, or are suffering from depression, there is a frequent use of the word I, me, mine. So when we're grieving, we're thinking about ourselves a lot. And if we begin to think of others and manifest compassion, then our sense of that suffering self diminishes. And today, brain research and it talks about neuroplasticity and neurobiology, that the more we meditate and practice compassion and realize it, the frontal lobe, where the emotion of compassion resides, expands. And so we experience a greater equanimity in that. And so I was saying that each faith offers a different consolation. I talked about the indestructible Atman in Hinduism. In Islam, it's the paradise that awaits people who have served Allah, and hell, the others. In Christianity, we wait for redemption, ultimate heaven or hell. In all cases, in some ways, we reap the fruits of our actions. And I just want to spend a few moments to flag that, because it is often seen in a very simplistic manner, and as to how Buddhist psychology and Western psychology and Indian psychology too, in some ways, tends to understand it. And that is, it is not the action itself, but it is the intention behind the action that creates the imprint in our consciousness. So when Gandhiji said that the means are as important as the ends, I think that in our tradition, we tend to look at it a little differently. So for example, if there was a riot and I had a family of a particular tradition in my house, and the other people from the outside came and wanted to claim him, and I said he isn't here, that intention would lead to a positive imprint in my consciousness. And it is a sum total of these impressions, sort of like, the nature-nurture debate. So our life's experiences, out of intention and volition, plant these in our minds. And so the aspiration of meditation or practice is really to consciously feed to the brain a different set of ideas and a mental diet that will transform our experience. So it becomes important, even as I talk about our Eastern traditions, to feel the emotions as they are moving through us, rather than avoiding or burying them. Because when we avoid or bury them, they get imprinted in our consciousness as karmic imprints, and sort of spout out or come out in spurts when we are least able to deal with them. And so pretending we're fine when we're not is a very dangerous physiological and psychological process. And the only way out is through, and the only way through is in. So the best thing we can do is to move through our process by practicing self-compassion, tending to our grief and our pain in an honest and gentle way. I thought, I'll wait if time, if there's still time, I'm happy to lead a little, meditation that helps us with this. But the essence of the practice really is to observe the emotions that come up, to observe the feelings that come up, not be judgmental about them, to observe them and to listen to them, and to listen to them both through the body and through the mind. So you will find that there are physical correlatives to our emotions, and to observe them and to watch our thoughts. And many system of medicines, we have a very eminent homeopath with us, and you're going to have another homeopathic speaker on Sunday, Dr. Banerjee, and they will tell you how much in homeopathy the mind or the symptoms of the mind are used to determine the most appropriate medicine for you. Just sort of a few random reflections. That I found that it's very useful to not just hear ourselves, but to listen to ourselves. And when we say listen to ourselves, these are all ways of trying to peel the layers of falsehood that cover up the reality that is unfolding amongst ourselves, inside of ourselves. So even as we are looking to understand the reality of the human condition, we also need to sort of peel off the layers of our own reality, of the thoughts and emotions that are unfolding within us. It's hard sometimes, but it's not complicated. And it helps us to be more compassionate when we think of other people's suffering as our own. And pain and love are amazing reminders that we are human, and should reassure us at least that we are where we need to be. And the most powerful antidote that I have experienced myself in my pursuit of self-compassion is to think of the loved one we have lost, or the aspect of us that we have lost, and what would they say to us if they were here right now. And I just want to sort of pause, and with that pause wind up and ask that we just reflect on this for a few moments, that what if the person who we miss most dearly at this time were here with us, and what would they say? That would then become the reality of our relationship with them.
What a thought. What a thought. I just looked up to my parents' pictures.
Alka ji, it would be so nice if we could conduct the meditation. Rajiv ji could conduct it, and we will end with the meditation. And if people, I'll just leave your email ID in the chat. So if anybody has any questions, they can mail it to you. Because I think ending it with the meditation would be just perfect. If that is okay.
Okay, you asked for it.
Please, we demand it.
Oh, I'm happy.
Rajiv ji, Mrs. Darshan Shah has posted 3 questions. I have messaged them directly to you.
We can email it. We can email it because that will go beyond this the session. So I'll email those to him. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with the. I think all of us would like the meditation.
Well, you know, I'm happy to stay on a little bit to respond to them if you're comfortable with that.
Yes, I'd like to do that after the meditation. So
yes, sure.
Those who would like to leave could do that, and I could stay on and take advantage of this Zoom session.
Yeah, I'll be happy to do that. Sure. Okay. Yeah. So wherever you are, please sit comfortably with your back straight and your arms on your lap. And I shan't look at the screen, but I see some people who are slouching and who are not, but then each of us is in a different space, mind, and aspiration. And um, silence is strategic to enable you to settle in to wherever you're sitting. And the first part is really the breath. And I will just describe what you have to do rather than lead you in through it, so that my voice doesn't intrude into your experience. And so, you need to take 3 deep breaths. Don't take them yet. And you take a normal breath. And then when you breathe out, it's important that you take longer to breathe out than you breathe in. Now, depending on how you feel, you could give yourself a count. So just breathe in naturally, count to whatever it comes to. So for example, if your breath in is 6, then you try and breathe out to 10 or 12. But don't try and consciously change your in-breath, but do try and slow down consciously your breath as you breathe out. And since I can see some of you on the screen, when you have done that, just look at your cameras. So now I know that you have completed that process. So let's start with breathing in. And when you finish breathing, just observe the first thought that comes to your mind. And then the second. Observe, don't comment. It's not good. It's not bad. It's just a thought. When I say the next word, just observe where your thought travels to. Your body. Just observe which part of the body it traveled to. What is the sensation there? Do you have a feeling about it? Pleasant, unpleasant, good, bad? Go back to your breath. Each time I say a word, just direct your attention to whatever comes up and observe. What emotion are you feeling? Can you give it a label? fear, sadness, joy. Is there a sensation that accompanies it? Where? Return to your breath. Now visualize someone you love deeply who has departed. Visualize them like you were looking at a photograph of theirs. And suddenly, the being in that photograph becomes real. Feel their presence. If it was someone very close, husband, wife, child, mother, father, lover. And you can experience their presence in terms of their body temperature, their warmth, the particular fragrance or smell that people we care about and have been intimate with tend to have. Try not to analyze or consciously direct what comes up for you. Try to just let it come up. And stay with it. It might be unpleasant. It doesn't matter. Now say to them what you have long wanted to and never said. Have them say what you would have wanted them to say, not what they might have said. On both sides, between you and this person, it could involve forgiveness. It could involve an expression of love, of resentment. Why did you die and leave me? Or anything that comes up for you. And we will just hold that for a few seconds. Now let that moment morph into a truly happy moment that you may have spent with them, or moments. Relive the happiness and the fun times. Slowly, like an old photograph, the image, the presence begins to fade till it becomes a small speck of white light. Try just observing it, not grasping it, not holding on to it, just watching it become a small speck of light. That begins to move into the distance and soars up through the clouds into the dark night and becomes a star. Just stay with what you feel. Observe what you feel and any thoughts that come up. Just let it all be and open your eyes and come back from that reality to this one. Welcome back to COVID. I'm afraid that is our reality today. But this also tells us that how we can create our own reality. And so long as we are aware both of the sort of the objective reality and the reality that our minds create for ourselves, we will, as time and life unfolds, be able to strike a better balance between our aspirational reality and the reality that we live in. And it is the conflict, the incompatibility between these realities that really is the basis of our pain and our suffering. Whether it's the reality of death and the reality we fabricate for ourselves, or our longing for a lost human being or a lost title or a moment in our lives. And that is really the aspiration of any spiritual path. And we can substitute these realities by a God who we pray to. And then the God is that reality for a time. And then we come back to our experiential reality. So depending on the path we follow, we find alternative realities to console and reassure us. But so long as we begin to mistake any reality to be absolute and final, and not the fact that we, as the observers, determine what we choose to see and experience. And as we sort of go forth into COVID, there is also the reality in COVID of the amazing human stories of people who are coming up and out of their closets and of their safe spaces to reach out and to make a difference in other people's lives. I mean, we in the colony we live in Delhi, the Sikh community, have been absolutely amazing. I mean, we've had oxygen langars, and people, families who are in our community who are, sending out messages and say, "Do you need a meal? Can I cook you a meal and send it to you? Tell me, what your eating preferences are." So, I mean, we can either just look at death, but we can also look at compassion and love that this time is manifesting. So just send out a prayer that, ultimately, I think, the suffering of those around us so overwhelms us. And we need to recognize that really there is nothing to say. There's no explanation. It is just to be with it, whether to be with our own suffering or when there is someone we care about and who we want to help. I mean, we're always looking, for the right things to say. And there's I don't know how many of you have heard of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She's this amazing woman who did pioneering work in terms of Western psychology in documenting different stages of dying and grieving. And so that, these are processes that we have to go through. And there is her co-author was a chap called David Kessler. And when I was reading around this, I just wanted to throw this out as to sometimes instead of just being there for people, we are struggling for the right thing to say, as if there was a right thing to say. It can only be an expression of a heart that truly connects with that person's suffering. And so you just give 3 examples, and I'm going to end with that as the sort of practical feedback as to, how do we handle this. And so the research has shown, and this is so revealing, that the 3 things that people who are struggling most want to hear, whatever empirical data is worth, but this is the documentation. And that is they want to hear, "I'm so sorry for your loss. I wish I had the right words to say how much I care. I don't know how you feel. I can't know how you feel, but I'm here to help in any way I can." What is it that they don't want to hear? He or she is in a better place. There is a reason for everything. It's been a long time. You need to move on with your life. I know how you feel. I've been through it myself. And it's reported that what people most want is what we miss the most these days anyway, is sometimes you just want a hug. And just that touch. And so we let mind enter, the reasoned, logical, structured mind that wants to say the right thing. And so we go through these polite rituals without the felt experience that must drive them. So compassion and love are not a formula. They are a sensibility. They involve a certain willingness to open ourselves to others' pain so that we can be pained. And the willingness to be pained by the other person's pain is the ultimate connect. And that, is ultimately achieved by who we are and who we become. And no script, and certainly not a struggling, failing sadhaka like me telling you what to do is going to get you there. But thank you all for your patience. just talking about what has been weighing on my mind has certainly brought me comfort and a feeling of lightness. So thank you.
Thank you. It's my privilege that Alka Jalan Foundation, I'm very close to them and connected, and feel all the joys, pains, sorrows, celebrations, everything with them. And my name is Darshan Shah, and you know, we have to do the work ourselves in this journey of life. This is what I really wanted to take away from here, the karmic imprints to consciousness. Thank you, Rajiv Bhai, for your enlightening talk. So many stories and so many experiences, subjects that you touch upon, and you linked them, you know, you connected them like a thread of pearls, like a necklace of pearls. And thank you for that.
That's enough. I'm blushing. I will get ego.
No,
Thank you
no,
very
no.
much, everybody.
Not enough. Not enough.
On behalf of I'd like to say that on behalf of the Alka Jalan Foundation, it's Alka ji and the audience. It gives me this privilege to say our sincere gratitude and our pranams. Thank you very much, Rajiv Bhai.
Thank you. Thank you.